What happens when you discover a hidden cave filled with paintings your Cherokee grandmother made 40 years ago, and every single image depicts major events from your life that hadn't happened yet when she painted them? I was 23 winters old in 1851, exploring the mountains near our village, when I found a narrow opening behind a waterfall that led to a cave no one had mentioned before. The walls were covered in detailed paintings, a boy being born under a red moon, that same boy falling from a horse and breaking his arm, that boy meeting a girl with yellow hair, that boy standing at a crossroads, choosing between two paths. And I recognized every scene because I had lived every single one of them. But my grandmother had painted them 4 decades earlier, before I was even born, before my parents had met, before any of these moments could have possibly happened. At the bottom of the final painting, in her distinctive style, she had painted 7 words that made my blood run cold. The last painting is not finished yet. Before I tell you what that unfinished painting showed, less than 5% of you will read this entire story without stopping. If you've ever wondered if some people can see the future, if you believe that time might not work the way we think it does, keep reading. Because what I discovered in that cave, and what happened when I tried to change the future my grandmother had painted, will make you question everything you know about destiny, choice, and whether our lives are already written before we live them. My name is Cease Tomorrow, though that wasn't always my name. I was born Silent Smoke in the year the white man calls 1828, in a Cherokee village nestled in the Smoky Mountains, where morning mist clung to the valleys and old secrets hid in forgotten places. My grandmother painted sky died when I was only 3 years old, so I barely remembered her. But everyone in the village remembered her, and they spoke of her with a mixture of respect and unease. Your grandmother could see things, my mother told me when I was growing up, not with her eyes, with something deeper. She would sit for hours staring at nothing, then suddenly announce that someone was coming to visit, or that a storm would arrive in 3 days, or that someone in the village was about to fall ill. And she was always right, always. What kind of things did she see? I asked. What kind of things did she see? I asked. My mother hesitated. The future, I think, though she never said it directly. She would just know things before they happened. It frightened some people. They thought she might be a witch, but she was just a seer, someone the spirits spoke to. Did she ever see things about me? I asked, curious about this grandmother. I barely remembered. You were very young when she died, my mother said carefully. But yes, she talked about you constantly in her final years. She said you were special, that you had an important path to walk. She said, my mother paused, as if deciding whether to continue. She said she needed to paint your story before she died, so you would understand when the time came. Paint my story. What does that mean? I don't know, my mother admitted. She disappeared into the mountains for weeks at a time during her last years, always carrying her painting supplies. She said she was creating something important, something you would need someday. But she never told anyone where she went or what she was painting. And after she died, we never found whatever she had created. We assumed the mountains had claimed it, or she had destroyed it, or we had misunderstood what she meant. That conversation stayed with me, but I didn't think about it much as I grew up. I was a normal Cherokee boy. I learned to hunt, to track, to understand the language of the forest. I had friends, family, a comfortable life in our village. I was happy. Then when I was 7, I fell from a horse and broke my arm. It was a bad break, bone jutting through skin, blood everywhere. The medicine man said it, and it healed, but I still have the scar, a distinctive zigzag pattern where the bone tore through. When I was 12, my best friend and I discovered a fox den in the woods. We watched the mother fox and her kits for weeks, learning their patterns. One day the mother fox looked directly at me, and we held eye contact for what felt like forever. I felt a strange connection, like she was trying to tell me something important. When I was 15, I met a white trader's daughter who had yellow hair, the first person with yellow hair I had ever seen. Her name was Sarah, and for 2 weeks while her father traded in our village, We spent every day together. She taught me more English. I taught her some Cherokee. We became friends in that innocent way teenagers do when everything feels significant and temporary at the same time. When I was 19, I stood at a literal crossroads, where two paths diverged in the forest. One path led back to my village. The other led toward the white settlements, where opportunities existed, but danger lurked. I stood there for almost an hour, trying to decide which direction my life should take. Eventually, I chose the path back to the village, to my people, to the traditional ways. These were just normal life events, random moments that everyone experiences. I didn't think they were connected to anything larger. Then I found the cave. I was 23, out hunting alone in the mountains. I had ventured farther than usual, following a deer trail that led to a beautiful waterfall I'd never seen before. The water cascaded down from high rocks, creating a curtain of mist and sound. I approached to fill my water pouch, and that's when I noticed it. Behind the waterfall, barely visible through the rushing water, there was an opening in the rock face. Curious, I carefully climbed through the waterfall, getting soaked, but managing to squeeze through the narrow gap. On the other side was a cave entrance, hidden so perfectly by the falling water that you could pass this spot 1,000 times and never notice it. I lit a torch from my pack and entered the cave. It went back about 50 feet, opening into a larger chamber, and that's when I saw them. Paintings, hundreds of paintings covering every surface of the cave walls, rendered in natural pigments, red ochre, black charcoal, white clay, yellow earth. The style was distinctive, flowing and detailed, and I recognized it immediately even though I'd only seen it a few times on pottery in our home. This was my grandmother's work. I stepped closer, raising my torch, and began to examine the paintings. They weren't random images or abstract designs. They told a story, a life story, my life story. The first painting showed a baby being born during a red moon. I was born during a lunar eclipse, the moon blood red in the sky. My mother had told me this many times. The painting captured the exact scene she described. Her in the birthing lodge, the red moon visible through the smoke hole above, the medicine women attending her. The second painting showed a boy, maybe 7 years old, falling from a horse. His arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, bone breaking through the skin in a distinctive zigzag pattern. The exact injury I had suffered, the exact scar I still carried. Guys, I need you to stop and feel this moment. Imagine finding paintings of your own life, detailed and accurate, created before those events happen. Imagine seeing your scars, your memories, your private moments captured by someone who died 20 years before those moments occurred. Comment below if you've ever experienced something that made you question whether time is as straightforward as we think. Have you ever had a moment where past, present, and future seemed to blur together? This is where I began to understand that my grandmother hadn't just been a seer, she had been something more. I moved along the wall, my hands shaking, my torch trembling. The next painting showed a boy and a fox staring at each other in the woods. The fox's eyes were captured perfectly, intelligent, knowing, communicating something wordless. I had lived this exact moment. Another painting. A teenage boy sitting with a yellow-haired girl, both laughing. The girl's features were precise. Sarah's face, her distinctive hair, even the blue dress she wore. My grandmother had painted a white girl's face decades before that girl was born, decades before she walked into our village. Another painting. A young man standing at a fork in two paths, one leading to a village, one leading away. His face was troubled, uncertain, and in the painting he was turning toward the village path, the exact choice I had made 4 years ago. I was hyperventilating now, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. These weren't vague symbolic images that could be interpreted multiple ways. These were specific, detailed, accurate paintings of moments from my life, created 40 years ago by a grandmother who had somehow seen my entire existence before I was born. I continued along the wall. More paintings showed moments I recognized. My initiation ceremony into manhood. A hunting trip where I tracked a deer for 3 days. A conversation with my mother where she told me about my grandmother's visions. Even my decision to go hunting alone this morning. There was a painting of me leaving the village at dawn, carrying my bow, heading into these specific mountains. Every significant moment of my 23 years was here, painted in loving detail by a grandmother who had died when I was 3 years old. But then I reached the final painting, and my blood turned to ice. It showed me older, maybe 25 or 26, standing in this exact cave, holding a torch, looking at a painting on the wall, a painting of myself looking at a painting. The recursion made my head spin, but that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that this painting wasn't finished. The figure of me was complete, but the rest of the image was only partially sketched in. I could make out rough outlines. Another person standing beside me, someone important based on the prominent placement. And behind us, something large and ominous. Maybe a storm, maybe smoke, maybe something else, only partially rendered, the details incomplete. And at the bottom of this unfinished painting, in my grandmother's distinctive style, she had painted 7 words in Cherokee symbols. The last painting is not finished yet. Not the last painting is unfinished as in, she ran out of time, but is not finished yet as in it was still happening, still developing, still unwritten. Below these words was a small painting of a hand holding a brush, an invitation, a challenge, a choice. My grandmother was telling me that everything up to this moment had been painted, had been seen, had been predetermined. But this final scene, the one I was living right now, was still being created. And maybe, just maybe, I had some say in how it would finish. I stood in that cave for hours, studying every painting, trying to understand. My grandmother had seen my entire life before I lived it. Every choice I thought I was making freely, she had already painted decades earlier. The horse I chose to ride that day, I broke my arm, she had painted that specific horse. The path I chose at the crossroads, she had painted me choosing it before I was born. Was I living my life, or was I just acting out a story that had already been written? Did I have free will, or was I following a script my grandmother had seen in her visions? And if she could see all of this so clearly, why had she left the final painting unfinished? I returned to the village as the sun was setting, my mind churning with questions. I didn't tell anyone about the cave, not yet. I needed to think, to understand what this meant. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing that unfinished painting in my mind. The figure beside me, who was that? The ominous presence behind us. What was that? And why had my grandmother stopped painting before revealing these crucial details? The next morning, I made a decision. If my grandmother had seen my life, had painted my choices before I made them, then maybe I could prove that I still had free will by doing something she hadn't painted. Something unpredictable. Something that would show that the future wasn't as fixed as those cave paintings suggested. In all the paintings, I had been wearing my traditional Cherokee clothing. So I decided I would dress differently. I borrowed clothes from the white trader who was visiting. Pants, a shirt, a hat. I looked ridiculous, nothing like myself, but that was the point. My grandmother hadn't painted me like this, so by dressing this way, I was doing something she hadn't foreseen. I felt triumphant as I walked through the village in my borrowed clothes. People stared at me, confused and amused, but I didn't care. I was proving that I controlled my own life, that the paintings weren't absolute prophecy, that the future could be changed. Then my mother stopped me, concern on her face. "Why are you dressed like that?" "I'm trying something new," I said, not wanting to explain the real reason. She studied me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Your grandmother painted you like that once." My triumph evaporated. "What?" "When you were a baby. She painted a picture on a piece of hide. You as a young man wearing white man's clothes. She said you would try to change your path by changing your appearance. But that clothes don't change destiny. She said it was part of your journey. Understanding that external changes don't affect internal truth." My mother paused. "I'd forgotten about that painting until just now. I wonder what made you think to dress like this." I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. Even my attempt to prove free will had been foreseen and painted. Even my rebellion had been predicted. I returned home, changed back into my traditional clothes, and sat in silence for hours. Everything was in those paintings. Every choice, every moment, every attempt to escape the predetermined path. My grandmother had seen it all. But then, I realized something important. My grandmother hadn't painted the future to trap me. She had painted it to prepare me. All those paintings weren't chains. They were maps. She was showing me the path, not to force me to walk it, but to help me understand it when I got there. And that final unfinished painting wasn't incomplete because she ran out of time or ability. It was unfinished because she was leaving space for me to complete it. She had painted everything up to this moment, the moment I discovered the paintings, because that was the moment when I needed to stop following and start choosing. The person standing beside me in that unfinished painting, the ominous presence behind us, those weren't predetermined. Those were possibilities, futures that could branch in different directions depending on choices I hadn't made yet. My grandmother had painted the past that led to this moment, but the future, that was mine to paint. Over the next several years, I returned to that cave regularly. I brought paint supplies, and slowly, carefully, I began to add to that final unfinished painting, not completing my grandmother's work, but adding my own. I painted the details she had left blank. The person beside me became clear. A woman I met when I was 25, someone who understood both Cherokee and white cultures, someone who walked between worlds as I did. The ominous presence behind us became a storm. Yes, but also an opportunity. The coming changes that would challenge our people, but that we could navigate together. I added things my grandmother hadn't sketched at all. I painted children we would have. I painted a future where the old ways and new ways could coexist. I painted hope where there had been only rough outlines. And do you know what I realized? My grandmother had seen that I would do this. She had seen that I would find the cave, understand the paintings, and take responsibility for completing the story. The unfinished painting was actually the most complete one of all, because it included my choice to become an active participant in creating my own future. I'm 57 winters old now as I tell you this story. I've been married for 32 years to the woman from that painting. We have 5 children. We've navigated the difficult years when our people were forced to move, when our traditional lands were taken, when our culture was threatened. And through it all, I've remembered my grandmother's paintings. She didn't paint my future to show me I had no choice. She painted it to show me that I was part of something larger, a story that connected past, present, and future. She painted the path not to force me to walk it, but to help me recognize it when I got there, so I could walk it with understanding instead of confusion. Here's what I learned. The future isn't fixed, but it's not random either. We're all part of patterns that are bigger than us. Stories that started before we were born and will continue after we die. Some things are meant to happen. Call it destiny or fate, or the Spirit's plan. But how those things happen, how we respond to them, what we make of them, that's where our choice lives. My grandmother painted me falling from a horse and breaking my arm. That happened. But she didn't paint whether I would become bitter and fearful of horses, or whether I would learn from the experience and become a better rider. That part was up to me. She painted me meeting a yellow-haired girl. That happened. But she didn't paint whether that meeting would open my mind to other cultures or close it with prejudice. That part was up to me. She painted me standing at a crossroads. That happened. But she didn't paint whether I would walk my chosen path with confidence or regret. That part was up to me. The events of our lives might be painted before we live them, but the meaning we give those events, the person we become through them, the future we build from them, that's ours to create. If this story moved you, share it. Share it if you've ever felt like your life was following a pattern you couldn't quite see. Share it if you believe in the wisdom of ancestors who see further than we can. Share it if you understand that accepting destiny doesn't mean giving up choice. It means understanding the difference between what's written and what's still being written. And remember, you might not have painted the beginning of your story, but you're holding the brush for how it continues. Your ancestors might have seen the path, but you're the one walking it. And every step you take adds detail to a painting that was always meant to be completed by you. That is my story. That is how I found my grandmother's cave of prophecies and learned that the future isn't fixed. It's a collaboration between what's fated and what's chosen. And I would do it all again, because understanding the difference between those two things is what made me who I am. To Painted Sky, my grandmother who saw tomorrow, thank you for painting the path but leaving room for me to walk it in my own way. Thank you for seeing me before I existed and loving me enough to guide me even from beyond death. The paintings in the cave remain. I've taught my children where to find them. And I've added my own paintings beside my grandmother's, my continuation of the story, my chapter in the family narrative. Someday my grandchildren will find them and understand that they too are part of a pattern, a story, a destiny that includes but isn't limited by the choices of those who came before. The past paints the outline, the present fills in the details, the future waits for the next brush stroke. Comment below. Have you ever felt like your life was following a pattern? Have you ever experienced something that felt like destiny? Have you ever found evidence that someone who came before you knew things about your life they shouldn't have known? Your story matters. Share it.